estate industry finally has a regulator that tips the scales in the favor of the home buyer. In fact, RERA is the government's big step to completely reorganize this market. What investment opportunities has RERA ushered in, and how will it change your next home purchase? Thank you for joining us. I think that there couldn't have been a better time to have a conversation like this one, and I haven't seen a better panel to have a conversation like this one. I think it's a perfect representation of stakeholders in this industry. We have government, we have developers, we have analysts, and we have the legal end. The only representation that's missing is the customer. So if, with your permission, that's the role I would like to play on this panel as a representative of a home buyer and the customer on the panel. I know that within the industry there's a certain amount of nervousness, if that's the right word to use, I'm using it loosely. Among customers, there's a need to understand what this bill means, but there's also a feeling of hope now that there's someone on the side of the home buyer. I think if we put our heads together at this point and understand what sort of changes the bill will bring over the next year or so, we can actually look forward to an industry that's welcoming and supportive for all stakeholders. I want to open the discussion with Mr. Hiranandani. I will say this from the point of view of a customer, sir, that this was a bill that was not just much needed, but also long overdue. I know the industry is nervous, but wouldn't you agree that regulation really was the need of the hour?
I think we've had regulations in Maharashtra under MOFA, and also a regulatory bill was formed and passed by even the President of India. So in Maharashtra, a lot of regulation is already in place. However, I agree with you, and on all India basis, the transparency which was required for the end consumer was not available. And I think this bill has really gone a long way for answering that issue of transparency, which was not there. People were not coming to know what they were getting, what is the house they are getting, what is the title to the house, what is the area that they are ultimately going to get, and of course the issue of when they are going to get that house. I think those issues have been adequately answered by this bill, and I think the consumers should be extremely happy on that account, and I think it's good for the country.
Mr. Bhalla, I want to ask you this question. If we read the tone of the bill, it does put the customer first, the home buyer first. The discussion that happened at Rajya Sabha, which I must tell you, I was standing outside Parliament listening, and it seemed like a healthy, mature discussion where all of the parties there put the customer and the citizen first. We're sitting here in a room full of developers who are possibly worried that the pendulum has swung in completely the opposite direction here. Is it true that when framing the bill, the general view was that customers are being taken for a ride in this industry, and that's what we're fundamentally trying to stop?
There is a possibility that sometimes it may be misutilized, but I think everything depends upon intelligent interpretation and also, good implementation of the law. And I'm sure it will be implemented nicely. It is much more rational than what was earlier envisaged.
Mr. Shroff, there's a risk up till now that I took on as a consumer when I booked a home, whether that was launch or pre-launch. When I went and booked and parted with my money, the risk that it might not finally see possession date is a risk that I took on as a customer. Now with this very comprehensive regulation, that risk gets passed on to the developer. As a customer, I'm taking on very little risk. Is there a cost involved that you believe will now also be passed on to the customer because the risk has been moved off? It will take a year or two to settle in. We might actually see prices go up a little bit because developers will be tempted to pass on that 5-year warranty cost, to pass on the escrow cost to the customer.
I'm personally of the view that there is so much level playing field which has been created with the economic changes that we are seeing. Today we are in a buyer's market already. It looks like in the coming months and maybe coming days that it is not going to be a seller's market what used to be here 5 or 10 years ago. As a result of which I believe that rationalization of the cost will always be there. And if you buy a air conditioner with a 5-year warranty, you know that there is going to be some cost added to it. So the same way here it will be marginal. It will not be that the builder will be able to push some additional imaginary cost into it. To my mind, this particular law has given so much teeth to the consumer that somewhere down the line, black sheeps are on both sides. It is not so that it is only the builders who are probably indulging into something which can be called as a malpractice. There are at times, and in a large projects, the people who join initially the project, they become greedy, and at the end of the day, when the project goes into second and the third phase, they become a little funny, and then they start looking up the new law and the provisions.
Yes.
That will be the cost which the new coming consumer will have to bear for the delay, for the litigation, for the kind of enforcement of this law, which may generate.
I would like to add one more thing. We have experience only of builders in the north.
Yes.
And I can tell you because last, 2-3 years, I have been myself interacting, with most of the builders. Just trying to, carve out a small, in any township, a small place for all my batchmates. They all have houses here or there. They wanted to, sell off all the houses because 5 of my batchmates in last 4 years, they have either died of cancer or brain tumor, something or the other, and average age is now becoming, very less. So all of us are worried that let us have a place together where at least families who are left out, they can be taken care of. You will be surprised that one big builder with whom, we were negotiating, we saw that, in their case, we were advised by the people from inside itself, don't get in, sir. Why? Because, basically all the money has been diverted elsewhere. They have other, priorities. So the housing is not going to be completed. And it's a big builder. It's a big town. One of the best, most ambitious projects, in Visas.
If I were to just put that in a nutshell, what you're saying, even if you're only speaking of the NCR market, is there is an intention in the community, in the developer community, to increase margins, to perhaps bully customers into getting into deals that might not be on their side?
Plenty of it. In the name of, this, you see the cost, they will only mention the basic cost in every advertisement. After that, the moment you go on to sign the agreement, there is face-off cost, samne wala cost, piche wala cost, aage wala cost. So many costs are added on.
Niranjan, Hiranandani, respond to that, the evidence of malice within the community. And now you have 2 customers here. We're both customers. And I'm asking you because he said very large builders who bully customers.
Well, it's very simple answer. Like you have beautiful women and you have ugly women. So you have good builders and you have bad builders. And certainly we wouldn't like to color the good, bad and ugly with one color. But actually...
do you think the bill does that? Not differentiate between good and bad?
No, I think this is a level playing field as far as the law is concerned. That's why I said first, on the transparency issue, which was imperative, I think it's a level playing field. So I think whether you're a big builder, small builder, good builder, bad builder, or whatever it is, or ugly, you have to mandate it. The fear is not about transparency or regulations in the regular sense of the term. And I think if there are bad builders, as Mr. Bhalla has clearly pointed out, and there are, and we have to accept that, I don't see any problem if they are going to be hanged. There's nothing wrong with that. But if tomorrow it is misused or abused, as has happened in the case of urban land ceiling, the same parliament which said 1976 was great law, itself said that it has caused corruption beyond imagination. It's a law which actually did not meet the ends of the people. So we want actually a good law, which it is, to be implemented in a proper sense. And if good people get appointed and done, because remember, it's an all-India law. It's not just about Delhi, NCR, Mumbai, periphery, Bangalore and such. Even if you have a small place in Sholapur or Kolhapur or any of the small towns and areas, more than 500 square meters, correct me Parimal Bhai if there's anything different, but you really need all the regulations. So that's a fear that if the regulation is going to be misused or abused by the regulator in direct or indirect sense, and there is corruption which starts, if that gets actionated by this, that is dangerous. But as far as the level playing field of the law, I think it's very equitous and it should be.
All right. The thing that excites the consumer the most about this bill is the information that will be available. There will be a regulator. In an ideal world, there'll be a regulator. I'll be able to go onto that website and actually get honest to goodness verified information about the project that I'm going to buy. Just having access to information as a regular customer at zero cost puts the customer in such a massive position of power. Shashank Jain, in terms of also positions of power now for investors who are looking at this country's real estate sector from outside, because it's a huge opportunity. The problem that was standing in the way up till now was transparency or the lack of it. Does this also solve that problem? Will we become more attractive to foreign investors?
There's been a big euphoria with the global investors because general perception has been, as you said, lack of transparency, taking people for ride, etc. That, you know, just to highlight, doesn't only hold good for the customer side of it. You know, if you talk to the investor community, you know, the lenders, the private equity players, they also have a similar feeling. You know, that we've been taken for a ride in the past because of all the kind of crisis, global financial crisis that we've heard. So they are also seeing it as a very, very positive step.
A big cheer from investors. I know the industry is a little nervous about that. Are you happy with the 70% escrow, do you think, including land cost? Is that something that will easily be managed?
The earlier version of the bill said that 70% was specified in the law, but that the states would have the right to reduce it below that level. But that, of course, did not provide for the land cost. Now that it does provide for the land cost and the construction cost, the total cost of the project, that makes it more workable. But there can still be problems in places like Mumbai, where the selling price is so much more than the construction cost. And then we'll have to see how it's going to be actually implemented.
All right, I just want to, you know, before we go
on this point, I think, to be fair, the bill, you know, does provide some flexibilities and leeway. It says that the developer can withdraw money out of that account proportionate to the cost of construction. Now, what has not been defined is...
There are conditions to that as well.
What has not been defined is how do you calculate proportionate, you know, land cost comes in, there's a JDA, revenue share, etc. But I think, to be fair, at the central level, I would assume that's been left to the state governments to take nuances of each state.
I will continue with what he said, but there is something which was spoken by the Honorable Minister on the floor of the House in Lok Sabha. Venkaiah ji has clarified that there is no bar against withdrawing that kind of a land cost which has been already paid, or the land cost to be separately withdrawn. For which I think that ultimately the state government will have to make some rationalized rules which will become helpful, and that 70% has been a fixed one. It's a statutory thing. You can't reduce that amount, but if you've already paid, then it will be pro rata which will be deposited, and a regulation will have to be made out to that effect by the state government.
Mr. Shroff, there have been a couple of other clarifications that have come in from the Urban Development Ministry. One is, of course, the fact that imprisonment will only be used as a last resort. The second is that ongoing projects being brought under the purview will not have to stop. They'll just be given 3 months to register themselves. They can continue sales until that point. So this whole fear that we had that everything will come to a grinding halt will not happen. Was that much needed in terms of clarification? And of course, we'll expect more clarification going forward.
You are very right. But I think the industry is not worried about whether the projects will come to a halt or not. What is worried about is that all the disclosures about completed project will also come in the public domain, which is a matter of serious concern from the angle where the industry stands today. There is so much of internal rivalry, competition, and there is so much of a PIL matters which have been going about. That information, coupled with what is constructed and awaiting occupation, when comes in a public domain, whether it will be used, misused, or abused by some areas and some lobbies, that is the worry which the industry is feeling, because transition will be very smooth and there will not be stopping anything.
In order to make this a productive session, what I want to do is a round of questions to all of you. Advice to industry who's going to have to see 1 or maybe a year and a half of turmoil before this whole thing is seen through. And advice to state regulators who will come in over the next 6 months of specific things that have to be kept in mind in order to make this successful. Mr. Bhalla, I want to start with you. What's your advice right now to both regulator and to industry, because this is going to be a difficult time for both.
As far as the regulators are concerned, I think advice is simple. It all depends upon who is placed as a regulator. And they have to, go by the facts of the case, because many times, the regulator also, interprets it, one side. They also have a bias. So there are problems which the industry also faces. The consumer certainly has been, on the receiving end. So if they take a balanced view, I think most of the times the things can be resolved. There should not be any problem.
Mr. Hiranandani, this is a fair point. The fact that it's now happened, and there were a lot of things that industry would have liked to see happen differently, but the regulation is now here. Do we now just have to learn how to live with it and work within the purview of what's available?
No, I think we look at it very positively. I think if you can get what the Prime Minister wants is housing for all, and I think if I can achieve it in the time frame that the Prime Minister has targeted, and if this is used as an implement to help us in reaching that objective, I think it's fantastic. We are only putting the fear because in the past we had those problems. And I think unless we don't put these issues on the table to the government, to the powers that be, we don't want to go the ULC way. We don't want to go the way other places have gone, whether it is in the case of the North, where you have mentioned, sir, the difficulties that you have had, and also the other things. We would be very happy if it works well for all of us, including the country.
So one suggestion that you said is, of course, that the state governments are going to have to be very careful about the individuals who are put in positions of power. What are the other possible solutions for the for the problem that you're mentioning right now, that we might go the urban land ceiling way? So how do you prevent that from happening?
I think if you chose good people who understand the business of business in the real estate side, and there are lots of people who have been on the housing side and urban development side, I think if you chose right people to really be fair and equitous, I don't see there is a problem in this segment. But the secret is slightly different. My feeling is, we need to focus on volumes. What has happened in the North, at least one aspect of it which is positive, is that we've been able to produce large volumes of apartments. In many places, the regulations have prevented volumes from being created. My fear is only one, that it should not happen that those regulators, because of that fear of the regulator, the volumes do not get created. The day we can create volumes and surpluses, whether it's in telecom, whether it's in aviation, whether it is roti, kapda, makan, we need to see that surpluses are created. That part is missing. We don't find promotion of housing in that sense of the term, where government agencies are also regulated, in the sense that the regulator can pass orders to mischievous people in the government who do not give occupation certificate. So that is the only thing which I thought the law could have been inclusive of. Anyway, it's not there, but we need to think about it. So when we say level playing field, we need it on both sides. I wish there was more teeth in the regulator, at least against government authorities, as well as the developers in that sense of the term.
I would like to add, that is what I wanted to say, that law has come into place. And it is not the end, it is the beginning. So there will be, as and when the issues are faced by the industry or by the consumers or otherwise, so they will be brought in. And then the amendments will follow. All good laws, they must have to have flexibility to accommodate the changes which are required over a period of time.
In fact, Mr. Shroff, I want to bring you in here. There is a tiny window that's been left open in the bill, where it says that the regulator will be put in a position to recommend to the government a redressal forum against the acts of local bodies and competent authorities, which in this case are the mischievous government authorities that you're talking about. It's not strong worded, but it's there, and we haven't had it up till now. So is that maybe the window that we can use to go forward?
That's advisory scenario. In fact, I may also caution and inform the audience that there is a provision, like several laws provide, that the government, if it finds that this authority it's not in public interest to continue, the RERA can be superseded also.
For 6 months.
So ultimate power is with the government for the purpose of doing it, but there has to be a will by the government to enforce. But one thing is most important this evening, which I think through the platform of NAREDCO, that now the real test begins. This law is a good, I would say that, adventurous piece of legislation which is comprehensive and probably much needed and cannot be complained against.
Mr. Harish, I want to ask you this. How much room for interpretation will each state government have with their rules and regulations?
There will be some room for interpretation in the making of the rules and regulations, but it has to be within the framework of the Act. And because it's a central act, there will also be decisions of the courts. There will perhaps be some monitoring from the central government. We do not know how that will work out. But I think even more than the flexibility in the rules and regulations, there's one other aspect which has been touched upon by everyone, and that is the role of the authority and how they should function. There is definitely need for a watchdog because there are so many things that go wrong. Niranjan himself talked about that, about the time for completion of the project and so many other issues. So I think there's going to be a very great need for a balance. You have to protect those who need protection, but you do not have to hurt those who do not need to be just killed and driven out of business.
So what is your advice for industry right now?
I guess it has to be appreciated that the bill has been made for the whole country.
Yes.
You have various states which are in different level of growth and maturity. So I guess the formulation of the rules by every state is going to be very, very crucial. Because even if you take the state of Maharashtra, there are various, Bombay is something, a different animal altogether, as one would say it. So there has to be the regulation which has to take cognizance of, the different issues of the different cities.
All right. Yes.
No government can afford that the real estate or the construction industry goes into peril, because this is the biggest multiplier as far as incomes or jobs are concerned. There are so many ancillary industries dependent upon it, so that one thing will also act upon their minds. Whenever there will be issues or concerns, the government will immediately swing into operation. This industry cannot be overlooked at all.
Closing remarks, Shashank?
In some ways, real estate industry is very similar to liquor industry. Older the stock, the value increases. No other industry you'll find this where old stock is valued more than anything else. So if there are delays in the project, the developers are incentivized because the pricing will go up. Customers till few years back were very happy because their prices were going up, they were in the money. The problem has started in the last few years when the prices haven't increased. So if there is some sanity where instead of what we can demand or get from the market, if there is a cost plus approach, like any other sector we have, possibly we could bring down some of the issues, if not eliminate everything.
Mr. Hiranandani, last closing comments before we wrap this up.
I think one of the things where there's a big disconnect is on one side, the Prime Minister's objective of housing for all, so you need volumes. And here you talk about controls, controls, and controls. I wish we had a sync between the two and said that in this bill also, we talk about how the regulator will work towards creating volumes of housing, whether in the economically weaker section, middle class section, affordable segment, and all that. And that needs a very big proactive work from the government, and I don't see any other machinery really there. This law could have been used in that, and if the regulator, because of one of the clauses which is there, which talks about how this can be done, can be used to move in that direction and say create surpluses in every segment of the society, whether it is officers of the government, whether it's the economically weaker section, which requires cross subsidy. There is no focus at a macro level on that. This can be an instrument where the regulator can also do that. If we can combine that role of the regulator to add value to what the Prime Minister wants about housing for all, then the type of regulator that you will have is a person who will be proactive in order to achieve an objective rather than just being a regulator. So I think it should be promotion of housing and regulation rather than just regulation.
I'd like to thank the gentlemen on the panel for joining us. This has been extremely helpful, I'm sure, to the audience watching at home and to the audience in the room. Thank you all for watching. Thank you.